Well, good evening, Resonate. It's good to see you guys. Glad to be here with you. I really am thankful this evening for the opportunity to gather with you guys and to get to worship. I know it looks different during spring break, but this is a fun group and hopefully a fun evening, and it really is a tremendous blessing to be able to be here together. For thousands of years, Christians throughout all of history have gathered together every week as the family of God to love and encourage one another, to learn from God's word, and to give God the worship and praise that he deserves from us. So I think it's helpful to remember that for many of these Christians throughout history, and then also many Christians alive today, they gather at great risk to themselves. I just read this week a report that hundreds, so one report said 800 Christians in Syria were slaughtered this week by Islamic terrorists merely for their faith and their willingness to gather together to worship. And so I pray that we don't let ourselves become complacent or nonchalant with these abilities that we have the blessing to be able to gather every week together to worship God with no fear, no threat, no risk to ourselves. That is a great blessing. If people from around the world and people throughout history have been willing to gather at the threat of death, it should challenge us to make the worship gathering a high priority in our own lives. And so I hope you're challenged in that direction today, and I'm really thankful to be here with you guys. I'm also thankful and excited today because we're starting a new series. We're starting a series called Yours to Manage. It's going to run for 3 weeks, just like Austin said. And during this series, we're going to explore a topic that some of you are very passionate about, some of you are totally ignorant about, and some of you are very sensitive about. This will be a 3-week series on money. So finances, stewardship, investing, generosity. The aim of this series is to see money how God sees money. What does God have to say about money, and what does it mean for us as his followers? Now, I want to acknowledge right off the bat as we start this series that all of us come into conversations about money from a different place. So maybe you feel informed and confident. Maybe you feel clueless and insecure. Maybe you feel offended that I would even dare talk about your finances. But I've found that through years of counseling people through different life stages, that the factor that shapes your view of money the most is your upbringing. Your parents, your household, wherever you grew up. You might not be aware of it, but your view of money is how it is because of your upbringing. So this could be a great blessing, or it could be a great curse, depending on the family that you grew up in. But your family, your upbringing, has shaped your view of money. There's no way for us to escape it. Tracy and I see this most often when we do premarital counseling with couples. So you take two individuals with different upbringings, different backgrounds, and then you're getting ready to mash them together into one family. And they start to realize that they look at money very differently. And those differences kind of have to be figured out in order for you to have a healthy marriage. For like a personal example, I was blessed to be raised in a family that was wise and generous with money. So both my parents managed money very well. They were diligent to give money away. And as a little kid, they taught me to tithe. They taught me to save my money. They taught me to make purchases wisely. But then over the years, I've realized that my upbringing, especially my early years when we were living really frugally as a family, that has shaped my current view of money. So like when I go out to eat, I never get something to drink at a restaurant. I could probably count on one hand the number of times I've had anything but water at a restaurant in my entire life. Because growing up, that was never an option. Like you didn't even look at the drink menu. It doesn't exist for us. We were a water-only family. So my mindset is I'm always hunting for deals, for sales, for refurbished or used items. I'm looking for meat in the grocery store that expires tomorrow, so it has like the markdown sticker on it. That's what I'm looking for at the grocery store. When I'm making a meal or going to buy a meal, I'm subconsciously thinking all the time, the equation in my head is calories per dollar. I want maximum calories for minimum dollars. That's the equation all the time in my head. So that's me. And then when I got married, my mindset clashed with Tracy. Her family was way more willing to spend money on things just for the sake of enjoying them. So like she gets a soda when we go out to a restaurant. For meals, she thinks in terms of health and enjoyment per dollar, not just calories per dollar, right? That's a more mature way for her to think. But we have different mindsets about money because we grew up with different experiences. And that's true of all of us. Some of you are savers, some are spenders. Some are overly frugal, some are overly impulsive. Some are stingy, some are generous, some are planners, some are gamblers, some are penny pinchers, some are big dreamers. Some of you are cautious, some are reckless, some are budgeters, and some are splurgers. Some of you are disciples of Dave Ramsey and his no debt, that's right, we got a Dave Ramsey fan in here, his anti-debt frugality. Others of you might be disciples of Grant Cardone or Robert Kiyosaki and their debt-friendly investor mentality. Everyone comes to this topic in a different place. And I want you to know that's okay. It's okay, however you walk into this series, because the hope is in this series that God would meet you wherever you are and help you see how he wants you to view your money. That's our hope in this series. And so just like any other area, we have to trust that true financial freedom is found in aligning to God's design, not just the current hottest money trend on social media. And so in this series, we're going to talk candidly about money. I know that might be uncomfortable to some of you. Few people are comfortable talking honestly about their money. The two most under-addressed topics in the Christian church are sex and money. Coincidentally, the two topics that lead to the most pain, the most destruction, and the most divorce in the whole world are, you guessed it, sex and money. Okay? Both sex and money are crucial, they are pervasive, they are powerful parts of our lives, and we are surrounded by teaching on both of those topics. You are surrounded right now by teaching. And so if the church doesn't have the guts to talk about those topics, to see what God has to say about them, then you will be discipled by social media influencers, celebrities, your professors. That's who's going to disciple you. People that have no investment in your health, your flourishing, and your future. So here's a crucial reality about tough topics like money, but money's not the only one. The enemy is always speaking. Okay? On every topic, the enemy is always speaking. He's not uncomfortable. He's not ashamed. He is always lying to you about these topics. It's constant. It comes from the world. It comes from our culture. It comes from our institutions, from our phones. It comes from our own flesh. The enemy's always talking. And so if the church will not speak up, then the enemy's voice is the only one you're going to hear. If the church will not talk about uncomfortable topics, if the church doesn't take on cultural issues, if the church doesn't take on the idols of the day, then the enemy wins. That's the reality. And so my hope in this series is that the uncomfortable conversation about money would become more normal. And that you learn to trust that what God says about money is best. I believe that if you start putting these truths into practice, you will experience the true financial freedom that God designed you for. And so in this series, we're going to spend 3 weeks looking at 3 big shifts that you need to make and I need to make in order to see our money how God sees our money. These 3 shifts, they probably run counter to a lot of what we have learned from our upbringing, what we learned from the world around us, but they're crucial for us to understand God's design for money. So those 3 shifts, these are in your handout notes that you got when you came in. The 3 shifts are from owner to manager, from hoarding to leveraging, and from stinginess to generosity. Those are our 3 shifts. And today, as we turn to the parable of the shrewd manager or the dishonest manager, we will be talking about the first shift, from owner to manager. And so if you have a Bible, would you turn with me to Luke chapter 16? That's where we're going to be today. Luke chapter 16. As you're turning there, it might be helpful for you to know that this parable that Jesus is about to tell is widely considered the most difficult and complicated parable in his ministry. It's difficult to figure out what he is communicating, but more than that, what he is communicating is difficult. Okay, so it's hard to figure out what he's saying, and then once you figure it out, it's hard to wrestle with what he is saying. It's uncomfortable for us. In this parable, Jesus calls us to a high standard, one that we may not be naturally comfortable with. And so I'm going to read through this whole parable together, and then we're going to go through it and break it down kind of verse by verse. Let's read the whole thing together. Luke 16, starting in verse 1. There was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was wasting his possessions. And he called him and said to him, "What is this that I hear about you? Turn in the account of your management, for you can no longer be manager." And the manager said to himself, "What shall I do, since my master is taking the management away from me? I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I have decided what to do. so that when I am removed from management, people may receive me into their houses. So, summoning his master's debtors one by one, he said to the first, 'How much do you owe my master?' He said, 100 measures of oil. He said to him, 'Take your bill and sit down quickly and write 50. Then he said to another, 'And how much do you owe?' He said, 100 measures of wheat. He said to him, 'Take your bill and write 80. The master commended the dishonest manager for his shrewdness. For the sons of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the sons of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourself by means of unrighteous wealth, so that when it fails, they may receive you into the eternal dwellings. One who is faithful in a very little is also faithful in much, and one who is dishonest in a very little is also dishonest in much. If then you have not been faithful in the unrighteous wealth, who will entrust to you the true riches? And if you have not been faithful in that which is another's, who will give you that which is your own? No servant can serve two masters, for he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money." So like I said, this is a complicated parable. What exactly is Jesus saying? What is he celebrating here? Is Jesus celebrating the dishonesty of the manager? Is that what's happening here in this parable? Is he celebrating that the manager cheated his master out of money, out of the 50 measures of oil, out of the 20 measures of wheat? What's going on in this parable? So let's read back through it again. We're going to go verse by verse, and we'll break it down. We'll talk about it a little bit more. So verse 1, start at the beginning. There was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was wasting his possessions. So it was very common in their day, and in fact, it's very common in our day as well, for rich people to have financial managers, people who manage their wealth. And so this rich guy, he has a wealth manager, and the manager's job was to steward and invest and manage the rich guy's properties and his assets and his money and stuff like that. So the manager, he doesn't own the money, right? It's not his money. It's the master's money, but he has been tasked with managing it. He's responsible for it. He has authority to make decisions with that money. Okay, that's his job. But evidently, he hasn't been doing a very good job at his job. The owner finds out that the manager is wasting his possessions, and so the owner fires him. Verse 2, and he called him and said to him, "What is this that I hear about you? Turn in the account of your management, for you can no longer be manager." So the manager is getting canned. Right? Wrap up your business, wrap up your accounts, get out of here. And now the manager has to figure out what is he going to do now. So verse 3, the manager said to himself, "What shall I do, since my master is taking the management away from me? I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg." So the manager thinks, what is my next step? Right? He just got fired. He doesn't have a ton of options. He's too feeble to go do manual labor. He's got too much self-respect to be a beggar on the street corner. So what is he going to do? And then it dawns on him. He has an idea. Verse 4, "I have decided what to do, so that when I'm removed from management, people may receive me into their houses." So he's got an idea, right? The light bulb comes on. He comes up with something that he can do on his way out that will earn him some friendships, in hopes that once this job is taken away, those friends can help him out. They can kind of keep him on his feet. And so before the accounts are officially taken away from him, the manager's going to make kind of this last-ditch effort to save his own skin. So he starts calling up the people who owe his master money, owe things to his master. Verse 5, so summoning his master's debtors one by one, he said to the first, "How much do you owe my master?" He said, 100 measures of oil. He said to him, "Take your bill and sit down quickly and write 50. Then he said to another, "And how much do you owe?" He said, 100 measures of wheat. He said to him, "Take your bill and write 80. So you start to see his plan unfold here. He starts cutting down the debts of all of his master's debtors so that they will owe him, right? You can imagine how happy these debtors would be if they met with the debt manager and the debt manager just forgives half of their debts. They'd be pretty excited, right? They would probably want to reward the guy who just cut down their debts. That's what the manager is hoping for. So you could picture this in a modern setting. Let's say that you take out a loan to buy a car. You go to Wells Fargo, you take out a $20,000 loan to buy your car. Now, imagine that the account manager at Wells Fargo, he hears that he's getting fired next week. And so as kind of a last shot at the company, a last shot to make himself some friends at the expense of the company, he decides to call you and he says, "Hey man, I'll do you a big favor. I'll take your $20,000 loan and I'll just cut it in half. I'll cut it down to $10,000. How would you like that?" what would you say? You'd be excited, right? That'd be great. That would be awesome. Thank you so much. How can I repay you? How can I repay you, account manager? That's exactly what's happening here. The manager is trying to make friends, or at least people who will owe him some kind of friendship, so that he can stay afloat after he moves into this next phase of his life. But now, so he's done this with the debtors, and now the master finds out. He discovers the dishonesty. What do you think he would do upon discovering? You'd think he would beat him. You'd think he would throw him in prison, something like that, right? But evidently, this owner had a pretty good sense of humor because he doesn't do that. Instead, verse 8, the master commended the dishonest manager for his shrewdness. So instead of condemning him for his dishonesty and theft, the master commends him for his shrewdness. This might be a term that you're not familiar with. Shrewdness means showing sharp powers of judgment. So it's being astute or prudent or wise or sharp-witted or clever. The master, he's not saying he approves of the manager's cheating, but he does say, I see what you did there. That's a pretty smart move. That's a clever move that you just pulled. That's the end of the parable. The master finds out, he commends the dishonest manager for his shrewdness. Okay, so that's the parable. Shrewd manager uses his fading position to gain him a leg up on his next phase of life. That's the end of the story. And now, having finished the story, Jesus turns to his disciples and he makes a few observations about the parable. Now, this is where most people get tripped up in this parable. Here's what you need to understand as you read these observations. Jesus is not commending dishonesty. Okay? He's not commending or celebrating dishonesty. Instead, he is pulling truth out of a realistic story. That's what he's doing here. He's not saying he approves of everything in the story. He's just pulling truth out of the story. This is something that I think many Christians are really weak at. We can fall into the trap of thinking that in order for something to have any truth in it, in order for it to have any value in it, then it has to be totally perfect. So like if a movie has any non-Christian themes, then it can't be appreciated by Christians. Or if a teacher says something we disagree with, then we have to throw out everything else he says. Or if a person makes one bad call, then we can't trust him with any other topic. Or if a Christian band puts out one bad lyric, then we can't listen to any more of their songs. We fall into that trap. But honestly, even more often, we actually do the same thing in the opposite direction. We think that if someone else celebrates one thing about somebody, they must approve of everything that person did, right? You see this all the time. If you celebrate one thing, you must approve of everything. I have dealt with this a lot as a pastor. To be honest with you guys, I've dealt with this a ton. I have quoted Martin Luther King Jr. and had people assume that I approve of his communism and heresy. I've quoted Jonathan Edwards and had people assume that I approve of his slaveholding. I've hosted teachers that come from a different theological background to come teach on an area that they have expertise in, and people have assumed that means I agree with everything they say on every topic. I have said that I've been thankful for various actions by the former Biden administration, and had people assume that means I'm in favor of their sexual confusion and advocacy for abortion. I've said that I'm thankful for things the current Trump administration is doing, and people assume that means I'm in favor of Trump and Elon's lifestyle of degeneracy and immorality. Listen, that is a wildly immature way to think. It's a wildly immature way. That's the way that children think. Totally honest. That's the way children think, because they have not yet developed categories. They don't know how to think in categories. So cancel culture, whether it's coming from the progressive direction or the conservative direction, is immature and silly. In order to be a mature critical thinker, you have to be able to separate truth from falsehood. And you have to judge each based on its merit. Okay? That's what it means to think like an adult. You have to be able to eat the meat, spit out the bones. You have to be able to throw out the bathwater while keeping the baby. Okay? You get where those phrases come from. That's exactly what Jesus does with this parable. He tells a story about a dishonest, crooked, lying, self-centered manager, and now Jesus is going to pull some lessons from the story. So if we're stuck thinking like children here, it's going to seem like Jesus is affirming the master's dishonesty. But if we can think like adults, we'll see that Jesus is eating the meat, spitting out the bones. He's deriving valuable lessons from the story of a sinful man. Okay? So let's get back to the text. Jesus makes two observations here in the second half of verse 8. For the sons of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the sons of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of unrighteous wealth, so that when it fails, they may receive you into the eternal dwellings. So two observations Jesus makes from this story. First, he says that the sons of this world, so that means non-believers, are often more clever, more wise, more prudent than the sons of light. So those are believers. Non-believers, often more shrewd than believers. But he doesn't just say it as a blanket statement, like this is true of everything. He says that they are more shrewd, quote, in dealing with their own generation. Right? So what does that mean? It means that non-believers are more prudent than believers regarding their futures, their future lives, their earthly opportunities, their own advantages and interests. Although the people of this world live just for themselves, they live to build their own kingdoms, they do it shrewdly. They do it cleverly. Non-believers are often more focused and more intent on using what they have to their own advantage. And Jesus says this to our shame. He says that Christians ought to be more shrewd. We ought to be more intentional about using what we have for our future lives. That's his first observation. In the second observation, it becomes a little bit clearer what exactly he's getting at. He tells us in verse 9 to use our worldly resources to make friends. So just like the manager did, right? Use your resources to make friends. But here's the difference. He says, so that when it fails, they may receive you into their eternal dwellings. So Jesus is saying the shrewd manager used his money to make friends for this temporary life, but that money, those friends, this life, it will one day fail. Those things are all going to fade away one day. And so as Christians, we should use our money to make eternal investments. Friends that will be with us not just for this life, but for eternity. Because we have an eternal aim, Christians ought to be more shrewd, more wise, more purposeful and prudent with our money. When preaching this text, R.C. Sproul said, what Jesus is saying here is if people in the secular world are shrewd and smart enough to look out for their best interests for tomorrow, how much more should the people of God be looking to the future of heaven? And if the corrupt person is smart enough as a steward to manage his money well, how much more is it incumbent upon the children of light to manage their money as God requires? Just as the manager looked out for his well-being for tomorrow, believers should look out for their well-being for eternity. That's the message here. The dishonest manager used his resources to make friends for the next stage of his life. We are to use our resources to make friends for the next life, for eternal life. This means that we use our resources to help other people come into God's kingdom and spend eternity with us in heaven, in our heavenly dwelling. As kingdom investors, we invest in what pays eternal dividends, what brings God glory and brings lost souls to know him. Here's how John Piper summarizes this parable. He says, here's the basic point. Don't worry about being a shrewd investor in this age where you can provide a future that will only fail. Instead, be a really shrewd investor by investing in people's lives. Use your resources to do as much good as you can for the glory of God and the eternal good of others who will go before you and welcome you home. This is the foundation for understanding the Christian view of money. You have to understand that your money is not yours. It's God's. It's God's. God has given it to you to manage, to steward toward a certain end. You are not, in the parable, you are not the owner. You are not the master. You're the manager that has been given responsibility to steward these resources shrewdly, wisely. So when you receive a paycheck, 100% of that paycheck belongs to God. Okay? Not 10%, not 5%, not whatever you plan to give to the church or to missions. 100% belongs to God. It's God's money. He has entrusted it to you for you to invest it in things that glorify God and bring people into his kingdom. So if you hear nothing else this evening, here's what I want you to understand and take away. Your money is not yours. It's God's. Your money's not yours. It's God's. You are not the master, the owner in the parable. You're the manager. I'm the manager. We've been given money by God to steward. This includes our money, our dollars, but it also includes our energy, our possessions, our talents, the breath in our lungs. Everything we have belongs to God, and he has given it to you for a purpose. God wants us to shrewdly manage all of the resources he's given us toward things that glorify him and invest in his kingdom. Now, I want to be careful here and make sure you know that this does not mean you have to give every penny to charity or you have to live a life of poverty. Okay? Poverty theology is just as wicked as prosperity theology. You should glorify God by both giving away what you have and by enjoying what you have. But it does mean that you should be a shrewd manager of all that God has given you. You should be shrewd with your money. Now, shrewd does not necessarily mean miserly or stingy or penny pinching. It means intentional. It means prudent. It means wise. Here's Jesus' point, his main point in the whole parable. Manage your money shrewdly by investing in eternal things. That's the main point. It's right there in your handout. I think there might be a blank you can fill in. Manage your money shrewdly by investing in eternal things. When you receive your paycheck, you should be thinking, how can I maximize this money that God has given me toward his glory and his kingdom? Just as the dishonest manager did all that he could to invest in his next stage of life, we should do all that we can to invest in our next lives in heaven. So Jesus closes the parable with some of his most famous teaching in the whole Bible on the topic of money. Verse 10, one who's faithful in very little is also faithful in much, and one who's dishonest in very little is also dishonest in much. If then you have not been faithful in the unrighteous wealth, who will entrust to you the true riches? And if you've not been faithful in that which is another's, who will give you that which is your own? This is a really important reminder in a room like this, when we have such a wide disparity of incomes. Some of you are college students with no jobs. You have no income. You're living off like a housing allowance from your parents or savings from a job you had last summer. Some of you have kind of a low-level part-time job. You're making a few $100 a month. Some of you have a good, solid, full-time job. You're making a few $1,000 a month. Some of you have landed really fantastic careers in high-paying jobs, and you're making 5 figures a month. No matter where you are on that scale, the message is the same. It's the same to you. If you're faithful with little, you'll be faithful with much. If you're dishonest with little, you will be dishonest with much. If you're greedy with little, you will be greedy with much. However you handle your money now is how you will handle your money later when you have more of it. Okay? I know that's hard for you to believe, but it's true. However you handle your money now is how you'll handle your money later when you have more of it. I talk to people all the time who say that they want to start living generously, but they don't make enough money. And I try to convince them that the habits that they are building right now with their money are the habits that will continue for the rest of their lives. If you feel like, right now in this room, if you feel like you make less money than you would like, I have some news for you. So does everyone else. Okay? Everyone in here wishes they made a little bit more money than they make right now. That feeling is not going to go away when you get the next job and make a little bit more money. No matter how much money you make, there will always be a next step. There will always be well, if I could just make this, then we could do blank. The older you are, the more you know what I'm talking about because you've been through some of those phases. There's no amount of money that will satisfy you because money doesn't have the power to satisfy. Money only has the power to make promises. It can't deliver on the promises. So money has the power to make you want more, but it doesn't have the power to make you content in what you have. So if you've convinced yourself, once I get a better job, once I'm making more money, once I have a little more wiggle room, then I'll use my money for kingdom investments. I need you to know you've believed a lie. You have believed a lie about your finances. What you do with your money now is what you will do when you have more. If you want God to bless you with greater resources, show him that you can be faithful with what you have now, no matter how little it is. When I was in college, me and all my roommates, we were all broke. We were totally broke. None of us had jobs. We didn't have money. But we adopted a phrase as a house that guided our house finances. So here was the phrase. If you have money to live, you have money to give. That was our phrase. If you have money to live, you have money to give. So if you have money to pay rent, to buy groceries, to buy a coffee, to buy a video game, to go to restaurants, then you have more than enough money to be generous. And so as a house, we set high standards for our generosity. Like we mapped out our budgets, we planned our sacrifices so that we could give to missions organizations, to students who are going to Elevate, to staff members, to our church, in Huddle, in our discipleship groups. Annually, we would have, some of you are going to be freaked out by this. That's okay. Annually, we would have people bring a printout of their bank statements for the last 6 months. And we would pass out all the bank statements, and everyone in Huddle would go through your bank statement item by item to see exactly what you're spending your money on. Full transparency, full accountability for your financial lives. I haven't done that in a little while here, but actually in the next couple weeks, I'm going to do that in my Huddle. So there's a handful of you guys that are in my Huddle. We're doing that soon because it was so helpful, such a good practice for us. But if you have money to live, I'm not saying everybody has to do it. I'm just saying we're doing it. If you have money to live, then you have money to give. If you have money to live, you have money to give. As far as I know, everyone in this room is currently alive, which means everyone in this room has money to give. You can be generous with the money God has given you right now. And so I challenge you in this next week to start thinking about how you're managing God's money. Are you investing it shrewdly into things that will pay off for eternity? Or are you wasting it on things that are frivolous, things that will soon fail? Have you convinced yourself that you don't have enough to start living generously? In future weeks, we're going to get more practical. We'll talk in more details. But this week, I just want you to reflect on your view of money, your use of money. I know this topic can be uncomfortable, but it is of the utmost importance because Jesus closes the parable this way. Verse 13, no servant can serve two masters. For either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. Notice he doesn't say, you shall not serve God and money. He's not making a command here. He's saying you cannot serve God and money. That is not possible. If money rules your life, then God doesn't. If money guides your decision making, then God doesn't. If money captivates your attention, then God doesn't. You and I choose our master. Will it be God or will it be money? I pray that you choose God because you're not accountable to me for your financial management. You are accountable to God for what you do with your finances. Now, I know this is challenging, but take heart. Money is a cruel master, but Jesus is kind. Chasing money will kill you, but Jesus died for you. Money will never satisfy you, but Jesus is the ultimate satisfaction. Jesus not only commands our generosity, but he displays the greatest generosity. On the cross, Jesus voluntarily gave up his life for you and me, for our eternities. And so as his followers, we're called to voluntarily sacrifice for the good of those around us. It's often said that the truest reflection of how seriously somebody takes their faith is shown in their calendar and their checkbook. What do you spend your time on? What do you spend your money on? And so this week, reflect on those questions. That's the plan for this week. And next week, we're going to talk about leveraging our money, how we can get more practical about what types of generosity God commands of us. But for this week, just reflect on your view of money. I'm going to pray for us, and then we have a couple discussion questions together. Would you pray with me?